Ladies and gentlemen, I want to begin with the end in mind. If I leave you with just one idea from the next few minutes we spend together, I want it to be this. We need to become more like our problems in order to solve our problems. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, the answer starts in the description of the challenges we face and the changes we have to embrace. You see, technology and globalization have radically revolutionized the nature, scale, and scope of the problems we face today. Our problems aren't just problems anymore. They're really more like ecosystems. Think about it. An ecosystem is a dynamic environment that has lots of interacting elements that are hard to predict and even harder to control. When you put it that way, doesn't it sound like the headlines from today? From climate change and global terrorism to the financial crisis and the Zika virus, what we're really dealing with these days are problem ecosystems. We've traditionally looked to leaders, both individuals and institutions, to address these issues. Now, I know that leadership is a word that gets thrown around a lot these days, and I wouldn't hold it against anybody in this room if you yelled out that we've reached peak leadership. But for me, leadership and the title of leader is a fancy word to describe a very simple philosophy. It's about taking responsibility to tackle and solve our greatest problems. And these great problems we face are incredibly interconnected. And yet, the leadership strategies we employ to overcome them are not. In fact, I would suggest that the way we look at leadership has hardly changed since we've entered this connected age. And so it's high time that we take a second look at leadership and that we revisit and redesign both the mindsets and the skill sets required to address these uniquely 21st century challenges. You see, we need to coordinate our leadership approaches better. There are a lot of problem solvers in this room. Notice I said problem solvers and not leaders. I'd like to consider myself one of them. And as I work on my problem, my little piece of the puzzle, I take solace, I take comfort, I take hope in the idea that someone somewhere must be fitting my piece of the puzzle into a bigger picture. But sadly, I've come to realize that's just not the case. As I've been toiling away in my boiler room, there's actually no one upstairs in the control room. Ladies and gentlemen, we simply can't tackle our problems anymore like this. It's just not going to work. We need a system to overcome these systems. Now, I'm not a computer nerd, but I bet I'm like most of you in this room. I have a laptop, a smartphone, a tablet, and I've always dutifully upgraded my operating system, my OS, every time Apple commanded me to. And I did so without ever fully grasping the incredible piece of magic that's contained in that little piece of code. That is until I realized that it's actually the perfect metaphor to help us think about how to overcome our problems today. You see, an operating system does a few really essential things. First, it manages both the hardware and the software in our system. Second, it coordinates and even optimizes their interaction. Third, it ensures that our process accepts updates. Now, this is really, really critical because unless and until we can manage to keep up with change, nothing's going to happen. Nothing good is going to happen. You see, we simply can't tackle these problems in silos or old solutions. We need a leadership operating system to address them. And in this leadership operating system, we humans are the hardware, And the way in which we structure our organizations, well, that's the software. And if you'll permit me and indulge me to extend this analogy just a little bit further, the updates to this system have actually already begun. You may have heard of interesting experiments that are underway, particularly in the private sector, and most notably in the tech space, where organizations are being remixed and reshuffled, and that people are rethinking how teams and employees collaborate. They go by esoteric names, and so I don't expect you to know most of these, but I'm going to name just two. The first is holacracy, and it's been put in place most notoriously at online shoe company Zappos. The second is the Scrum work system, borrowed from software development circles, but put in place most recently at Spotify, the online music streaming system. Now again, I don't expect you to know what either of these two terms mean. In fact, you don't need to, because I can summarize what it's trying to achieve in two simple words. No bosses. No bosses. Sounds like paradise, right? Well, I'm sorry to report that these well-intentioned experiments in the software of our system are actually doomed to fail. They're doomed to fail unless we simultaneously upgrade the hardware, the humans in our system. You see, we've always looked at leadership through the lens of either the individual or the institution. We've wondered what are the key skills or the key structures that make great leadership possible. In essence, we've treated the two parts of the system as if they weren't part of a system. And yet, that's exactly what we need to do now. Treat them like an integrated system. So how would we do that? How would we build a leadership operating system? Well, I suggest that we start by asking and answering a few critical questions. First, what are the properties that we want this leadership operating system to have? For example, do we want it to be rigid and hierarchical the way Microsoft Windows is? Or would we prefer it to be more intuitive, but still a little inflexible the way the Apple OS system is? Second, we need to ensure that we think like an operating system by consciously and constantly looking at the bigger picture when we're allocating resources, making decisions, and proposing solutions. Third, we need to ensure that this process can keep up with updates. And in fact, it's most useful to think of this as a process as opposed to a product. It'll never be finished. We'll always need to be improving it. Finally, I believe that successful leadership and problem solving in the 21st century will be characterized by three values. It'll be entrepreneurial, it'll be emergent, and it'll be experimental. Another word for that is open. And so I would like to see our leadership operating system be perhaps a little less elegant, but a lot more collaborative. A bit like the famously open source Linux operating system is. In fact, we might be able to describe what we're trying to build as a Linux for leadership. That last value, that openness, that finds its best expression in Linux, and that I hope will find articulation in our leadership operating system, well, that's really critical, because we need to ensure that everybody can contribute to this project. You see, if we do that, we'll take a page from nature's playbook. After all, coral reefs are not created by a master designer. They emerge as the sum total of millions of individual contributions that turn into a beautiful tapestry. This talk started with an observation, but it ends with an aspiration. Will you join me in building this leadership operating system? Each and every one of us in this room has the right, but also the responsibility to be part of the solutions to our problems. We need to equally share in the blessings and the burdens of leadership if we're going to tackle these enormous challenges. It's not going to be easy, but it's essential. And it's essential because this way of looking at leadership as an integrated system, it mirrors and reflects the way our problems present themselves now, not the way they used to be. What's more, we have to do this intentionally. We can't wait. This won't happen naturally. After all, computers, operating systems, humans even, we don't upgrade ourselves. The system has to reboot before the changes take effect. That change begins with us. Progress, George Bernard Shaw once pointed out, is impossible without change. And those who cannot change their minds cannot change anything at all. This is just an idea. But ideas start conversations. Conversations can spark movements. And movements, well, they can change the world. Let's start here. Let's start now. Faced with complex problems that are more like ecosystems, let's start by recognizing that we need our own system, an operating system, to address these issues. Let's start by recognizing that we need a leadership operating system that links hardware and software, humans and structures, but especially that links the two of them. If technology and globalization have supercharged our problems, let's harness those same forces to overcome them. Because, ladies and gentlemen, we need to become more like our problems in order to solve our problems. Thank you.